the real estate agents are thrown right into this, and they want to be able to help couples, but so often they don't have the skills. They have the skills for real estate, they have the skills for sales, but they don't have the skills for actually helping couples. And as you know, there are all sorts of statistics of how stressful home buying is. And then on a relationship, it becomes really, really tough.
Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond Podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day.
Hello. This is Jennifer J. Hammond. And as you know, I'm so excited. Anytime I can bring you information, especially those of you who are licensed real estate agents, so often we get in the middle of it when we have couples and they think we are the couples therapist, but we are not. So my guest today is the couples whisperer, Chris Shaver. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Jennifer. It's great to be here. We're going to talk about the 3 hidden ways that house buying can help or harm your relationship.
And I'm so excited because the real estate agents are thrown right into this, and they want to be able to help couples, but so often they don't have the skills. They have the skills for real estate, they have the skills for sales, but they don't have the skills for actually helping couples. And as you know, there are all sorts of statistics of how stressful home buying is. And then on a relationship, it becomes really, really tough. So let's talk about those 3 ways.
Well, the one thing I would say is that the hardest thing, what I always say, there's 3 fights in every relationship, and top of the list is making decisions. And when you're engaged in buying a house, you have nothing but decisions to make, starting with the realtor that you choose. The realtor you choose can be somebody socially outgoing who, communicates verbally. And if your spouse or partner is all about the written word or seeing things, seeing numbers, and you're about receiving things auditorily, that's like clash number 1. I've seen that. Actually, my sister's been a realtor for 20 years. I talk to her every day. So I have a strange expertise in this because I've heard a million stories about how couples do drive each other and the realtors and the other side in the sale crazy. But decisions number 1, selecting a realtor, figuring out which modality you want to be communicated to. And, I've been in those kind of situations where it's like, just communicate to me in writing. I need to see it. But that's like number 1. But
well, I love that you say that, because one of the things that I always, when I train real estate agents, when they're brand new and they meet with a couple, I say the first thing you should do is go through, let's just talk. Would you prefer for me, A, to communicate via email, B, communicate via a phone call, or C, communicate via a text message? And it is amazing how, and talk about, it would be great reality television, but so often both couples will come back with an answer, and you might have at the exact same time phone, text, and you're like,
yes,
yeah, so what do I do?
It's both, actually. The right answer is both in that case, is because the modality that we receive information is a very big deal. And when you're in high stress and trying not to make, mistakes, and it's really important that you get that information the way you need to get it. Yeah, that's just the beginning of the decision-making process. I think, once you get past that, you have a realtor you like, getting into which house you choose is the next big stress thing. And I would say it brings up parts of your personality that you may never see again until you buy another house. And buying a house can be sometimes once in a lifetime, but very infrequent, often purchase decision. So one thing, this is like big picture, and it's not even probably visible to most people, is the house is going to reflect your self-image. So who do you want to project yourself as to the world? And that's not really being like presumptuous or saying, oh, I'm thinking I'm better than everybody else or whatever. It just literally is like people just will see themselves. Oh, I'm a 16 or 17th century farmhouse, and I'm a brand new modern contemporary house, right? Like, and that is literally projecting image, and it's hidden. So like, walking couples. I'm sure you've had that experience of walking couples into the house, and I love it and I hate it.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I was saying, just like even communicating and ask, and then one says text message and the other one says phone call, and you're like, oh dear. And then the same thing when you walk in a house and one says, I love it, and one says, I hate it. And you're like, oh, have you told the other one? Because a lot of times they're in different rooms. Like one's in the kitchen and it might be the wife who's like, I hate this. This is horrifying. And then you go and the husband might be in the basement and it's the best like man cave he's ever seen. And he's like, this is the best house ever. And I'm like, so the two of you guys need to communicate because I'm getting the communication, but now you two need to communicate and agree upon, again, what are the most important factors? Because so often I see that for the husband, it might be, the basement. For the wife, it might be the kitchen, or it might be the garage for the husband. Whereas for the wife, it's very much about the flow. Like where is everybody going to come together? Is it going to be the kitchen or is it going to be the living room? So again, getting them to agree. Because again, as I'm going to tell you, I more than once as the real estate agent, I'm immediately like, I don't know where we go from here. Are we writing an offer or are you firing me?
Well, you actually dived into the second part of that for me because I was saying self-image, and I really don't think that's top of mind for both people. But if you look, are they driving a BMW or are they driving a used Ford? And that starts to show you some self-image things, and it can reflect in how much money they want to spend or what neighborhood they feel comfortable in. But when you get into, you know, uh, kitchen, basement, you're really starting to get into part of it is interest, right? Like I love to work with my hands. I need a big space to spread out. Equals you said man cave, but it really is. This is part of my personality. Our interests are not optional for us, and so you give a put a guy who loves to work with his hands in a place with no basement, no garage. That's that's not a happy thing. So even just identifying up front, like what are your core interests? What do you love to do? Starts to define what kind of house people want. And kitchen and flow and things like that are very functional, but they're also reflect our social energy that we have. And so if we're every night has to be groups gathered around, you need a nice big live-in kitchen, right? Like a family style kitchen. So there's all those personality things, but sorting them out is, part of it is still, modern kitchen, not modern kitchen, even get to things like, do I have a super high artistic interest? Does everything need to be just visually spotless and pristine? So there's a lot of things there that are driving people to say what they're saying, but getting those interests out on the table, like what do you really love to do? What would you really love to do in your house is definitely job one for a realtor, because otherwise you'll be driving around in circles with those folks forever.
And one of the things that also, there's so much there. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but there's so many things I want to try to get through. And one of the other hidden ones that isn't really hidden, but is hidden, and you kind of alluded a little bit to this in your, picking out, which house, whether you pick, I love the idea of Mercedes or the BMW versus the Ford, what are you driving? And also, but looking at money. Money is, as you know, unfortunately, a huge, huge factor in divorce in the United States.
Yeah, it
And
is.
I would say it's also a huge factor in major, major disagreements. And pitfalls is such an understatement, but pitfalls for the realtor when you're going through, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen, I won't say one or the other, but maybe it's the wife, maybe it's the husband, but I'll see one couple look at the other one and put out their bottom lip like, but honey, I would rather, and you realize, oh dear, here I am in the middle of a money conversation and I don't know where it's going, but sometimes it gets really awkward.
Yeah, money conversations are hard because they're actually reflecting a couple things. But the first thing that you've noticed about money conversations is that emotion comes out. Because, I mean, in every other country on earth, there's haggling about lots of things, so we get to see our haggling styles. But and people will haggle over an apple at a market. So now we're talking about haggling over tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and so it gets intense quickly. But there's something kind of there is something hidden there that if you're talking about but honey, the but honey, so you're saying in that relationship right there, it's like somebody is realistic, they're in charge of the finances. Somebody is dreaming, they're more idealistic, and they're in charge of the vision for how this their family will look and how the house will look. And so that clash between idealism and realism is often very, very present. And like you said, it can be very uncomfortable to be in the middle of that conversation. And I think for couples to recognize that idealism and realism will be there is a very big takeaway because it does help to write things down because your idealistic things of, our can you envision our kids playing out in the back 40 acres? And be the husband thinking, yeah, who's mowing that grass, right?
Exactly. Oh, I've heard that conversation of like, I've actually seen more than one deal go because they're like, I am not taking care of that yard. And the wife, of course, is like, wow, look at all this space for the kids to run and have friends over. And oh no, the whole
Yeah.
thing went down because the husband does not want to be taking care of that lawn, that big of a backyard. And I'm like, wow, and that's a conversation. So let's talk about some tools, some takeaways that the real estate agents themselves, I mean, we just ran through a whole bunch of different topics from communication to the money conversation to idealism versus realism. So how can the real estate agent not be, of course, I don't want to say the loser in this situation, but how can the real estate agent be helpful for the couple as they're going through the home buying, considering some of these factors we've discussed?
Well, I think you forgot interest on that list because actually the story that you just told about, the husband saying be out there, an outdoor, the thing that I have this assessment that measures personalities that in couples, but interests are profoundly important because you can not only have a strong interest, like I need my basement for my workshop, you can have an antipathy, a very, very weak interest, which means I don't want to be outside at all, right? At all, period. So, and I have clients who they're like, yeah, I go outside to get the paper in the morning. Now they don't even get the paper in the morning, so they never go outside. They're just happy. So, getting the interest at the things that you really will love to do in that house out on the table, so there's a real conversation can help realtors and it can help couples because now you're saying it checks these boxes, right? It checks these boxes and the yard is small since nobody wants to take care of the yard. But those are yeah, those are the core things. If you don't love your house, what do you have at the end of a very expensive purchase? And interests are the key to making you love your house.
And I think what you're saying is a lot of questions. As a real estate agent, I feel like that's one of the biggest things we can do. It's, just like you talked about negotiating style is, I definitely have, very different negotiating styles, not only between men and women, but I would also say I have observed in different age groups that you have different styles for negotiation. But I've also found that if you have two people who've come from very different backgrounds and growing up and they have different styles. So a lot of times, like I was putting a house on the market as the listing agent. So it's not even the buying process, it's now the selling process. And the husband and the wife have very different viewpoints on it. And I've talked to them. So I've asked them a question. So if we put it on the market, number one, do you want there to be, do you want to take the offers first come, first serve? Do you want them to come, after a certain amount of time and then we set a deadline and we look at them all at the same time? And again, I found that both of them, the husband and wife, answered those questions differently. And the good news is we're having this conversation early before the house is on the market and before we have an offer in hand. So I think that's from my viewpoint, part of it is asking the questions. And the second part of it is the timing of, because when you're asking the question right in the middle of what could be a heated emotional conversation, whether it's about finance, whether it's about the man cave or the garage or the backyard, it's really about asking the right questions, but also asking them at the right time. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, I think the more you can do up front to at least, and I'm a big fan of putting that on a piece of paper so that you can say,
There you go.
here's where here is where we are in the process. I'm actually a fairly unstructured human being, but the thing that I notice the most about buying houses is that realtors are used to the process. And as a purchaser, I had no idea where I was. And so lacking a map, I was made crazy. So just having that map, and even if the map says we're at the point now where we're going to receive offers, here's how this process is going to work, and just being able to point to it, I think is huge.
I agree.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, because without that map, you're just kind of like, I'm getting 20 phone calls a day from my realtor, and he or she is making me nuts. So, right? So, and
Yeah.
and I think structure is a very big deal to all people, and some of us want it, much more tightly structured, looser structured. But simply having that roadmap so everyone knows where they are is very orienting. And I think you can kind of make because and the other part is every house goes differently. Sometimes you get, you're in a bidding war with other people, or like you said, on the flip side, sometimes you're getting lots of offers, sometimes you only have one offer. It can always be different. So it's hard to predict, but the flow is fairly predictable, I think.
Yeah, and I think what you said I think is really important is the structure of it. Like one of the things that I like, even for myself, when I go out and buy a home or I hire someone who's doing something for me, is I love checklists. And so specifically to make sure that we have that structure of, and again, in writing so that I can look back at it, because I do realize that even for myself, and I've had this experience with clients, couples as well, that they'll ask me the same question over and over again. And I'm like, oh, so somehow that it wasn't understood or something else happened and it blocked the understanding of whatever the next thing was. So let's refer back to that email that had the checklist in it and let's go over it and then see where we are. Is there something in there that you didn't understand? What do we need to do to make sure? Because sometimes in real estate, I also find, and I'm sure you have an opinion on this, the language. So in real estate, sometimes we use words some of them are Latin and some of them are actually the legal language, because it's real estate. And so we want to make sure that when we are communicating, even on a checklist or any other kind of written thing, that people actually understand what's there. Would you agree with that?
100%. I think language gets right to the core of it, and the fact that so often it's a sales process and you're speaking one to one, you believe you're communicating, but maybe at the same time that you're communicating, I'm sitting there thinking this kitchen needs to be bumped out here, and so I've had that experience with realtors where they're saying things to me, and I have an extremely high literary interest, and I always say, I'm going to need to see that in writing so I can process it. It's the first time I've ever heard that. I have, no, I hear the words, but they're not computing. So, and I'm pretty mindful of that, but I think it's a very confusing process. Even with a highly experienced realtor like yourself guiding you through it, you're still as a first time or even second time infrequent buyer, you're kind of like, in a just being twisted around by the process.
Yeah, and I think that one thing I have found is that it's really important to celebrate, to as much as often celebrate, as I call it, the small yays in the process, because sometimes it's just so overwhelming. And like even for couples that are putting their house on the market, and I realize, well, the husband's already cleaned out the closet, but the wife has not. And now we're getting closer and closer to the photographer is going to be here. And so how are you doing on getting the house ready? Well, the husband's like, everything's fine. And the wife is not. And I realized that it is really important as well to celebrate those small little wins, whatever they are. And however that is. Would you agree with that?
Well, from a sales perspective or just a human relationship perspective, always keeping things affirmative and
Yeah.
rewarding people for the good things they do is the best you can hope for. Because I used to work with a guy who had a sign in his office who said the meetings will continue until morale improves. Um, and that
I've
didn't
seen
work
that.
actually. That
Yeah.
never worked. So yeah, I would say that. Hey, one thing I'd love to jump into and get your take on it too is just you were talking a little bit earlier about different styles, but different negotiating styles. I've heard the stories are legion that my sister tells me, and um, Usually it's a function of the person who's hyper competitive in negotiations that really can do some damage in a relationship. Because again, if people are inclined to haggle over an apple in the marketplace everywhere else on earth, boy, but does it get heated, and the whole process can get extremely heated. And I really I've seen that, heard stories, seen it firsthand, how people who are over the top competitive can really turn off their partners, because it looks ugly from the outside if you're not engaged in that way in the world over, and sometimes it can come down to pennies. I'm not giving another nickel to that person. And it's like, honey, this is our dream house. Like, what are you
Yeah.
thinking? Right? So I do think, I think having an awareness of who will negotiate, what that will look like in advance can be huge. And just saying like, all right, how are you going to do this? How intense do you get? Give me it on a scale of 1 to 10. Like, let's get it out there somehow. And if it's like, if somebody's a 1 and the other one's a 10, say, I think it would be good for you just to go downstairs away from the phone while this is going on because you're not going to like what you're seeing there.
Well,
How
and
do you think about that?
I was going to say, thank you for asking. I think one of the neat parts, at least that I have learned, and I have to say, is probably from trial and error and quite frankly, making some mistakes, is actually running through it all the way through to the end of a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. So, for example, if where I'm talking to a husband and wife and we're like, now we're negotiating over the home inspection items and they're the buyers. And like you just said, the wife is like, this is my dream home. I could care less about the broken whatever, broken fence, or we're going to repair that, or we're going to replace that anyway. And the husband's like, we're not replacing that. And he doesn't, the other person doesn't need to know. And we're in a boxing match and I'm about winning, not, especially, I hate to say, if I could overgeneralize lawyers and certain competitive fields where I find that they're like, they just want to win. And what I've said is, so we can fight this. However, what it could turn into, and then I go ahead and spell it out. And in a really, like, this could end up being that the whole deal falls apart and you lose this house because you're fighting over this little fence. Or you could say, there's also a possibility we can. However, after we finish and you've won, you don't have a friend. They hand you the keys and you're done. Versus if you find a way that we can really create a win-win, and it's not just about winning and creating a loser, you might find that as you go forward, there are times when you want to ask them about a color, a paint color, or you want to go back to those former owners, and you would rather them be your friends than someone you actually, beat in a game that was a win-lose.
That's great wisdom in those words. There's great wisdom in those words. But unfortunately, people who, from a personality level, are that competitive, they enjoy dominating and
Yeah.
domineering over somebody else and getting that victory. Hey,
Yeah.
there's one other thing that I thought of, and I don't know how it is in your market, but down in Tampa, where my sister lives right now, and actually where I live here in Pennsylvania, it's such a hot market that when you see a house, you have to put an offer in immediately.
Yeah.
And
Washington, D.C.
and
is
I
that way
think,
too. Yeah.
yeah, there's such limited inventory in the market, and I think that's actually worth just a couple minutes conversation, which is that most human beings, when it comes to, well, I would say most human beings need more time to think about a purchase decision,
Yeah.
much less a major purchase decision. And so the whole exercise right now of really doing all this, like you said, going through the entire process, thinking about your interests, understanding what you need, so that the moment you see it, you know it, and you can jump on it and you're not left uncomfortable and with buyer's remorse. It's so important right now. And people have different speeds, very different speeds wired into their personalities at which they make decisions.
So
So,
one thing, let me say, because we're going to run out of time and I want to make sure I get to some other stuff before we do, but what I'll answer, one thing I have learned in this market is that if you have buyers that you're representing and they're going through it, is that you should go ahead and go through the entire writing of an offer and get them agree to, if you see a house, are you looking at doing a home inspection prior? Are you looking at waiving something like your home inspection or your financial contingency? Let's talk about the pros and the cons of that, so that you've kind of gone through all of it before it's emotional.
Yep.
Before it's like, oh my gosh, this is the house, this is it, this is the one, this is the one. And it becomes a really crazy situation. So part of that is going through it and really not only, and you said it earlier in the fact that not only you run through it and you get them to agree and communicate with each other, but then you put the structure in of you have it, put them in writing. So as we
Structure's
discussed,
huge.
blah, 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 and then you write it all out for them. And that is just huge for them. But I don't want to run out of time before I say, I want to make sure people, so you're known as the couples whisperer. So I wanted you to share just a little bit about your journey and how people can find out more about you.
I'm a couples whisperer at coupleswhisper.com, and I have put together a platform where couples can come onto the website, take an assessment, and get very specific information about the kind of behaviors that will trip them up or tear them apart. It's a one-of-a-kind, easy way to understand more about your marriage. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so glad we could have this conversation. You and I could talk for hours about this.
I think so.
But I always want to look for the silver lining and say, always share those yays. So I'm going to ask you to lift your voice as we go off the air today and say yay with me.